Greetings, YouTube. The Doctor is in. Dr. Urias Papers here, coming back to you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And today on the Doctor Spell Prognosis, we are talking about the spell Wish. Welcome back to the channel that takes power gaming to the next level. Here we go. Wish is a 9th level spell. We are giving this an S. And we're going to start out by saying, or asking this particular question, is Wish the best spell in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons? No, it's not. And one of the main reasons I say that no, it's not. It's a very powerful spell, don't get me wrong, and it is an S-level spell when you have access to it, but it is not the best spell in the game because most characters will not have access to this spell. Because most characters are not going to reach the 17th level they need to get the spell. Most campaigns don't last past 11th level, so you just have to kind of keep that in mind. However, if you do get access to this spell, it is massively powerful, and it will probably be the best quality spell that you have in your retinue. So let's look at it. Let's go over it. Let's talk about it. So it's a 9th level spell that is usable by sorcerers, wizards, and the genie warlock. Bards can also get this with magical secrets. But the only warlock that can get it is the genie warlock. So sorcerers and wizards can get it, and there's something really cool that sorcerers can do with this spell. One action, range of self, only a verbal component, and we are going to talk about that a little bit more. So Wish is the mightiest spell a mortal creature can cast. By simply speaking aloud, you can alter the very foundations of reality in accord with your desires. The basic use of this spell is to do, so this is the basic use. Remember this. Everything below this is not the basic use. So the basic use of this spell is to duplicate any other spell of 8th level or lower. You do not need to meet any requirements in that spell, including costly components. The spell simply takes effect. And remember, the casting time for that spell is replaced with the casting time for Wish, because Wish is one action. You are only taking one action to cast the spell. You're not actually casting the spell. You're casting Wish to replicate all of the effects of that spell. Alternatively, now this is not these are not basic uses of the spell. Alternatively, you can create one of the following effects of your choice. You create one object of up to 25,000 gold pieces in value that is not a magic item. The object can be no more than 300 feet in any dimension, and it appears in an unoccupied space you can see on the ground. Lots of things that you can create. If you need a big galley boat, you can create one of those. A little mini keep, you can create one of those. It's just got to be worth 25,000 or less. There's a lot of spells that require material components that are very costly that you can use this spell with. Second, you can allow up to 20 creatures that you can see to regain all hit points and end all effects on them described in the Greater Restoration spell, which are things like Charm, Petrify, Curse, reduction in ability scores, and reductions in hit point maximums. Okay, so this is a panic button because of the last paragraph in this spell, and we're going to talk about that. But this is something you only do as a last resort because this is not a basic use of the spell. If you do this outside of combat or in combat, it's going to have some consequences. Third, you can grant up to 10 creatures that you see resistance to any damage type you choose. That's permanent. That is permanent. So resistance to a damage type, which is any damage type. So all 10 of you are going to have resistance to bludgeoning damage. All 10 of you are going to have resistance to fire damage. All 10 of you are going to have resistance to piercing damage. However, it's not a basic use of the spell, so keep that in mind. Fourthly, you grant up to 10 creatures you see immunity to a single spell or other effect for 8 hours. For instance, you could make yourself and all your companions immune to a Lich's Drain attack. So single spell or magical effect, a single one. So we're going to go fight this dragon, and it's a red dragon, so it's got fire breath. And we've got some time, so I'm going to make everybody immune to the dragon's breath for 8 hours. Now, again, that's not a basic use, so you have to think about that and how you're going to get around the last paragraph here. Lastly, you can undo a single recent event by forcing a reroll of any roll made within the last round, including your last turn. Reality shapes itself to accommodate the new result. For example, a wish could undo an opponent's successful saving throw, a foe's critical hit, or a friend's failed death save, or a friend's save. And I say death save because this might be the instance where you want to use that if it's their last save. You can force a reroll to be made with advantage or disadvantage, which is great, and you can choose whether to use the reroll or the original roll. Okay. Third, kind of on the general thing, you might be able to achieve something beyond the scope of the above examples. State your wish to the GM as precisely as possible. And then there's some examples here of how that could be twisted by the GM. But this is very open-ended use of the spell. The stress of casting this spell to produce any effect other than duplicating another spell weakens you. After enduring that stress, each time you cast a spell until you finish a long rest, you take a D10 necrotic damage per level of the spell. So if you do any of the stuff up here, or anything in this paragraph, then anytime you cast a spell after that, you're going to take some damage until you finish a long rest. This damage cannot be reduced or prevented in any way. In addition, your strength drops to 3 if it isn't 3 or lower already. For 2 to 4 days, for each of those days you spend resting and doing nothing more than light activity, you recover. Your remaining recovery time decreases by 2 days. Finally, there is a 33% chance that you are unable to cast Wish again if you suffer this stress. So there are some penalties to doing this. So think very carefully about those if you are in combat. But there are ways to get around that. So let's talk about pros and cons. Pro, it is one action, even for spells requiring longer casting times. It is a verbal component only, which means no costly components, and it's stated here, for the spell. And then the secondary effects, all those secondary effects are pros. They're awesome. Now, the only con about this is the weakening effect, but there are ways to get around this. And those ways to get around this are if you yourself are not casting the spell and something is casting the spell for you that you don't necessarily care a whole lot about, and that thing is simulacrum. So remember, when you create, and we talked about this spell already, when you create a simulacrum, it appears with all of your spells. So if you cast the simulacrum spell with simulacrum, because you can cast simulacrum with Wish, if you cast simulacrum with the simulacrum spell and you have a Wish spell, the simulacrum has Wish. And then if you rest and you get all your spells back and you cast simulacrum again, the next you can't actually cast simulacrum twice, but your simulacrum can use Wish to cast simulacrum, and then you can get a whole bunch of simulacrums. Now, you want to make sure that your simulacrums have a Wish spell. So by having one simulacrum who has a Wish spell, you're not actually casting the Wish spell. So you can have the simulacrum with you. It has a Wish, and it can do this. You could also cast simulacrum with the Wish spell. And that simulacrum now will have the simulacrum spell, but it won't have Wish. Then you rest for a day, and you come back with all your spells, and then you could cast simulacrum with the simulacrum spell. That one has a Wish. So there are a lot of different kind of ways to do this with simulacrum to create infinite number of simulacrums. It's not necessarily infinite, but it's a lot. Or to cast the Wish spell so that you're not casting it, but a simulacrum is, and then all this stress stuff happens with them. And this is a way where you can kind of start stacking like damage resistance on the party, because you just cast it once and 10 creatures get this resistance. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to address with this spell was casting times. Because you can cast a spell with one action, and also you can cast it without costly components. But we're going to address casting time. So again, we addressed this with simulacrum. You can use this spell to cast simulacrum. The simulacrum that shows up is not going to have wish, but it will have the simulacrum spell if you have it, which it can cast it. But it, again, that's kind of the dead end at there. But there, I racked and stack all these spells by casting time, and there's a whole bunch that have very long casting times. Glyph of Warding has a 1-hour casting time, and it also has a material component. It is an awesome spell because this spell glyph, you can prepare. So at higher levels, you can't really cast these at higher levels if you use Wish, but you still get 3rd level or lower spells with this one, with the spell glyph. That is a great use of this. You can make, like, essentially almost an infinite number of those. Planar Binding, Create Magan, that's another one. That one has a material component. It also has a casting time of 1 hour. Clone, Prayer of Healing, and all of these spells can be used by the particular caster regardless of whether they are that casting type or not. Mirage Arcana. So, you just have to go through and you have to look at all these spells. Symbol, that's another great one. You have to go through and look at all these spells to see the casting times and what makes sense to cast. Fabricate takes 10 minutes. Forbidden takes 10 minutes and costs 1,000. That's a freebie. I mean, all these are just great spells. Guards and Wards, Hero's Feast. All these spells, you can just instantly cast them. They're done, and it's over. All right, so as far as the sage advice goes, there's one thing I did find in here, and that is, can my sorcerer use a twin spell on a spell duplicated by the casting of Wish? Yes, costs the number of sorcery points appropriate for the spell's level you're duplicating. So there you go. If you're casting a spell that meets the definition of twin, then you can twin that spell. Now, would I do that? Probably not. I mean, it's a spell that only affects one thing. So, I mean, that is the thing that I found. But I think the big thing is going through here and figuring out what the casting times of these spells are, because some of these spells that have long casting times are very powerful, and some of these spells that have very costly components are also very powerful. And so you get to cast them with one action and no costly component. So I would go through there and figure all that out and then figure out what spells you want to cast. In addition, out of combat use of this spell with some of these things is actually really good. As long as you've got downtime to mess around with it, it's great. All right, that is what I have for everybody today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will catch everybody later.